David Ghent was an ordinary poor man, yet he spent nearly 16 hours a day playing with money. Still, his own pockets were always empty. In reality, David worked as a supervisor for an armored car security company called Loomis Fargo. His job was to transfer millions of dollars between banks. All day long he guarded this money, but his own salary was barely $8 per hour. How long could he continue suffocating his dreams under the heavy blanket of honesty? One day, frustrated with this honest life, David decided to do something wrong. This is the interesting story of the 1997 Loomis Fargo bank heist, in which an ordinary man forced the FBI to launch an international manhunt. This same story later became the foundation of the 2016 Hollywood movie Masterminds. Surprisingly, David Ghent himself appeared in the film made on his own story, and unfortunately, he did not receive any payment for it. Once again, welcome to USA Doc Videos. Viewers, David Ghent was a retired Gulf War soldier. He had protected his country, and now he was working as a vault supervisor at an armored car company called Loomis Fargo. In other words, money in his hands, empty pockets, and the burden of family responsibilities on his shoulders. He worked 75 to 80 hours a week, but in return, he earned only $8.50 per hour. David Ghent had grown tired of his routine. Loneliness and the frustration of not achieving anything big were eating him from the inside. These were the circumstances that created a strange restlessness in David's heart. And eventually, wrong thoughts began to take shape. No sooner did dishonesty enter David's mind than the devil opened a new path for him, and the name of that path was Kelly Campbell. Kelly also worked at Loomis Fargo. She was a sharp, bold, and mysterious woman. During her job, she somehow became friends with David, and they often met after office hours. Their friendship grew so strong that even after Kelly quit her job, they continued meeting. One day, Kelly introduced David to her friend Steve Chambers. Steve was a small-time criminal who constantly dreamed of making quick money. When Steve found out that David was a supervisor of armored vehicles at Loomis Fargo, a mischievous idea was born in his mind, the idea of stealing money. But to make this idea successful, it was necessary for David to join them. That's when Kelly and Steve began trying to convince David. David Ghent, whose intentions were already weakening, found Steve Chambers' idea like pushing a falling wall. At first, David was very scared because he had never done anything wrong in his life before, but Steve's persuasive style made him slip. He showed David dreams of a luxurious and comfortable life. David's frustration, Kelly's support, and Steve's greed together brought David to a point from where turning back was very difficult. Then began the planning of this master plan. Since Steve was only a small-time criminal, Kelly had no experience, and David was no expert either. Their plan was something that would make a professional thief laugh. The plan was very simple. On the night of October 4th, 1997, after duty hours, David would stay inside the vault. He would turn off the security cameras, steal the cassette containing the recordings, then load the money into the company van and escape. The plan was that after the theft, David would immediately flee to Mexico with $50,000. This amount was chosen because at that time, only this much cash was legally allowed to be carried across the U.S. border. The remaining stolen cash would stay with Steve Chambers. After things cooled down, David would return, and the money would be distributed equally among them. But there was a problem. The plan had a major flaw. Why would Steve later share the remaining stolen money with David after David had taken such a huge risk and escaped with only $50,000? But the blindfold of greed had blinded David. He never thought about this. And finally, that night arrived. On October 4th, 1997, at 6 p.m., David sent his trainee staff home early. Now he was alone and responsible for the vault. Nervous and scared, David entered the vault and, according to the plan, disabled 2 security cameras. He also removed the cassette containing all the recordings. However, he mistakenly forgot to turn off a 3rd camera hidden in a corner of the vault. This 3rd camera continued recording every moment of the Loomis Fargo robbery for the next several hours. Completely unaware of this, David began removing cash from the vault. But there was another problem. This time he wasn't taking counted cash for transport. He had to empty the entire vault all at once, completely alone. Most of the money consisted of $20 bills. According to estimates, there were more than 800,000 notes, or over 8,000 bundles. Loading such a massive amount of cash into the van required a lot of time. For the next 2 hours, David continued loading cash into the van. After loading approximately $17.3 million in cash, he still didn't realize that he had just committed the second largest robbery in American history. After loading all the cash into the van, David danced with joy, and this dance was also recorded by the third camera. The next morning, when other Loomis Fargo employees arrived and tried to open the vault, they found that the vault keys were missing. The police were called. Since David Ghent was the only employee not present, he immediately became the prime suspect. When the security camera footage was reviewed, all doubts turned into certainty. In the end, David's dance added salt to the burning wound. In the security footage, it was clearly seen that during the robbery, David was repeatedly messaging someone on his pager. This proved that he was definitely not acting alone. Now the police began searching for David Ghent and his accomplices. After searching the entire city for the next 2 days, FBI agents found the cash van parked in a forest. Inside the van, around $3 million in cash was still present, which was likely left behind due to its heavy weight and lack of time. The cassettes of both CCTV cameras were also found inside the van. This meant that David and his partners now had around $14 million in cash. Most of it consisted of 20 bills, which were not marked. This meant that if anyone spent them, they could not be traced. Meanwhile, according to the plan, David had already fled to Mexico with $50,000. He reached a luxury beach resort and started living there. The police and FBI published advertisements in newspapers to find David and his accomplices and announced a reward of $500,000 for anyone who provided information related to the robbery. The police appealed to citizens that if they noticed anyone around them who had suddenly acquired a large amount of money, they should immediately report it. Due to this campaign, the police began receiving a huge number of calls throughout the day. Eventually, the police had to arrange a separate desk specifically for the Loomis Fargo robbery. Most of the calls were simply people trying their luck, but one call proved crucial and put wheels under the stalled investigation. A man informed the police that his neighbor had suddenly come into a lot of money. That neighbor was none other than Steve Chambers, the real mastermind behind the entire plan. The FBI quietly began monitoring him. It was discovered that Steve could not control himself, and along with his wife Michelle had purchased a large and expensive house. They were also spending heavily on a new BMW car and other luxury items. When the FBI examined their bank accounts, it was revealed that after October 4th, they had suddenly deposited a large amount of money. Their suspicion grew stronger when a bank teller informed them that the money was deposited in the form of $20 bills. Michelle, who had come to deposit the money, also asked the teller how much money could be deposited without being reported to the federal authorities. By now, the FBI's suspicion had turned into certainty that among David's accomplices, Steve Chambers and his wife Michelle were definitely involved. However, they remained silent to identify the other partners, especially David. Only about 10 days into the investigation, everything began to unravel. To reach the core of the story, the FBI started tapping Steve Chambers' phone. During one phone call, the mention of David Ghent's name immediately caught the FBI's attention. This call was between Steve Chambers and a man named Mike McKinney, and they were actually plotting to murder David. In reality, Steve Chambers had gone mad after seeing so much money. As there was a flaw in the plan, he wanted to have David killed in Mexico and keep all the money for himself. The FBI arrested Mike McKinney, who immediately confessed the entire plan. Mike revealed that David was in Mexico and also disclosed that after stealing the cash from Loomis Fargo, they took the van to the Results and Results printing press parking lot, where the cash was transferred into another vehicle. Shockingly, Steve himself worked at this very printing press. He did not even think of taking the vehicle to an unknown location to transfer the cash. Since they had very little time, too much cash, and a poorly planned strategy, they left $3 million inside the van and parked it in the forest. They did not even bother to abandon the vehicle far away. This forest was located right next to Steve's office and only a few kilometers away from the Loomis Fargo warehouse. As a result, the police and FBI identified the entire group within the first 10 days. However, they waited for the next 5 months, collecting solid evidence. Finally, on March 1, 1998, David Ghent was arrested from Mexico. The next day, Steve Chambers, his wife Michelle, and Kelly Campbell were arrested from Charlotte, North Carolina. The FBI recovered 88% of the stolen money, while the remaining amount had already been spent by Steve Chambers on luxury items. Steve Chambers was sentenced to 11 years in prison, and David Ghent received a 7-year sentence. David was also charged with the bill for the missing $3 million, even though he had not actually spent that money. In 2016, a movie titled Masterminds was made based on this story. The film's producers hired David Ghent as a consultant, but he did not receive any salary. This was because legally, any money paid to David would have been directly used to repay his debt. At that time, David was working as a construction worker, and he stated that even if he worked his entire life, he would not be able to repay this debt with his earnings. Even today, David Ghent lives in Jacksonville, Florida, with his wife and children, earning his living as a construction worker. He also maintains a presence on social media, where he gives people a chance to learn lessons from his mistakes. Hopefully you will like and share this USA Doc video as well. Thank you very much for your love and supportive comments. See you in the next amazing video.